The tension in my parents' living room was so thick it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. The expensive Persian rug beneath my feet, usually a symbol of their perfect home, now felt like a battleground. My mother, Brenda, paced back and forth, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. My father, Arthur, sat in his leather armchair, shaking his head with a look of deep disappointment, as if I were a stain on the family name. My sister, Myria, was curled up on the beige sofa, sobbing softly into a tissue. She looked frail again, her skin holding that terrifying gray tint we all remembered from a year ago. "How can you be so heartless?" my mother screamed, her voice cracking with the intensity of her rage. She stopped packing and pointed a trembling finger right at my face. "Your sister is dying, Elsie. Her kidneys are failing again. You are the only match we know of. You're too selfish to give her your kidney." The word selfish hung in the air like a slap. My heart hammered against my ribs, threatening to burst. For 12 agonizing months, I had swallowed their insults. I had let them call me lazy, weak, and ungrateful. But I couldn't do it anymore. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by Myria's pathetic whimpers. "My name is Elsie," I said quietly, my voice surprisingly steady despite the shaking of my hands. "And I'm not selfish." I didn't break eye contact with my mother. I grabbed the hem of my shirt with trembling fingers. Slowly, I lifted it up, exposing my stomach to the cold air of the room. There, running along my side, was a jagged, faded pink scar, the mark of a surgery that had nearly broken me. "I already did," I said. The room fell into a dead, suffocating silence. My mother's face went ghost white. She whispered, barely audible, "You're lying." A year earlier, the hospital room had smelled of harsh antiseptic and the overly sweet scent of wilting lilies. I sat in the uncomfortable, hard plastic chair next to Myria's bed, holding her hand. Her skin felt cool to the touch, but there was a faint pink color returning to her cheeks. She had just come out of surgery a few days prior, and the doctors were calling the transplant a massive success. The machinery around her beeped in a steady, reassuring rhythm. My own side felt like it was on fire. Every single breath I took sent a sharp, stabbing pain through my abdomen where they had removed my left kidney. I shifted in the chair, wincing and biting my lip to hide the discomfort. I wanted to be happy for her. I really did. She was alive because of me. I had given a piece of myself to save her. "I feel so much better, Elsie," Myria whispered, her eyelashes fluttering as she opened her eyes. "It's like a miracle. I feel new." I squeezed her hand gently, forcing a weak smile onto my pale face. "I'm so glad, Rhea. You're going to be okay." Just then, I heard hushed, urgent voices in the hallway. The door was slightly ajar. It was my parents. "We have to handle this carefully," my father's deep voice rumbled, sounding serious. "I know," my mother hissed back, her voice sharp. "She doesn't need to know it was Elsie. If she knows, she'll feel guilty forever. Myria is too fragile for that kind of emotional burden." I froze in the chair. They weren't planning to tell her. My scar throbbed, a physical reminder of a sacrifice they were already plotting to erase from history. The very next day, the narrative of our lives had been rewritten, and I wasn't the author. I walked into the hospital room, moving slowly and hunched over because of the fresh stitches pulling at my skin. I expected a quiet morning, but instead, I found Eamon, Myria's boyfriend, sitting right by her side. He looked the part of the doting hero, holding a massive bouquet of red roses. My parents stood behind him, beaming with a pride that made my stomach churn. "Elsie, did you hear the news?" Myria asked, her eyes shining with tears of pure joy. "Eamon, he was the donor. He saved my life." I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving me cold. I looked at Eamon. He had the decency to look away, shifting uncomfortably in his chair and picking at the bedsheet, but he didn't correct her. He didn't say a word. I looked at my parents. My mother's eyes bored into mine, a silent, terrifying warning that froze the words in my throat. "Do not ruin this." "He wanted to protect you from the guilt, sweetheart," my mother said smoothly, walking over to place a comforting hand on Myria's shoulder. "He stepped up when no one else would. He's a true man." It was a lie so bold and cruel it knocked the wind out of me. They were giving away my painful sacrifice to a man who hadn't lost a thing, just to maintain Myria's perfect, guilt-free existence. Myria squeezed Eamon's hand, looking at him with adoration. "Thank you," she sobbed. "You're my angel, my literal lifesaver." The months that followed were a blur of exhaustion, physical pain, and silent resentment. While Myria bounced back with incredible speed, glowing with health and vitality, I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. The recovery was harder than the doctors had warned, perhaps because I was enduring it alone without any support. I was constantly tired. My skin looked pasty and gray. I couldn't walk up a single flight of stairs without getting winded and dizzy. When I visited my parents' house for Sunday dinner, I nearly fell asleep at the table, my head heavy. "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Elsie," my mother snapped, slamming a large bowl of salad onto the table with unnecessary force. "You've been mopping around for months. You're acting like an invalid. You need to get more sun or maybe join a gym." "I'm just tired, Mom," I said, my voice thin and weak. "My body feels heavy." "Myria is doing yoga 5 times a week," my father added, not looking up from his newspaper. "She's making the most of her second chance. You should take a leaf out of her book." I looked at Myria across the table. She looked radiant, her hair shiny and full. She had no idea that the energy she was burning so freely came directly from me. "Actually," Myria said, blushing as she held up her left hand. A massive diamond ring sparkled under the chandelier. "Eamon proposed this morning. Since he saved my life, we figured we're bonded forever. It's fate." The engagement party was held at an exclusive country club that cost more than my annual salary. The room was filled with flowers and crystal glasses. I stood in the corner, nursing a glass of tepid water, feeling the deep ache in my side that seemed to flare up whenever I was stressed. I plastered a fake, stiff smile on my face as guest after guest walked by, congratulating the happy couple on their miracle love story. My mother found me near the buffet table. She gripped my arm, her manicured nails digging painfully into my soft skin. "Don't you dare mention the surgery tonight," she hissed in my ear, her breath smelling of champagne. "This is Myria's night. Don't make it about you and your jealousy." "I wasn't going to say anything," I muttered, pulling my arm away from her claw-like grip. At the front of the room, Myria tapped a silver spoon against her champagne glass. The room went quiet, all eyes turning to her. "I want to make a special toast," she announced, looking lovingly at Eamon, who stood tall beside her. "To the man who literally gave me a piece of himself. My hero, Eamon. Without his kidney, I wouldn't be here to marry him. He is the reason I breathe." The crowd erupted in thunderous applause. Eamon stood up, waving awkwardly, soaking in the praise and admiration that belonged to me. I looked across the room and caught my parents exchanging a glance, a look of relief and complicity. They had won. My body started to rebel against the lie. Living with one kidney requires care and monitoring, neither of which I was getting because my medical records had been so thoroughly obfuscated to protect the family secret. The fatigue transformed into a heavy, crushing weight that made getting out of bed a battle. I started making mistakes at work, forgetting important deadlines and missing client meetings. "Elsie, this is your final warning," my boss, Mr. Henderson, said one rainy Tuesday morning. He stood over my desk, looking frustrated. "You look like you're sleepwalking. You're pale, you're slow. If you miss one more day or blow one more deadline, I'll have to let you go." "I'm sorry, I'm trying," I pleaded, holding onto the edge of his mahogany desk for support. The room was spinning around me. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed to flicker violently, burning my eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked, his tone shifting from angry to concerned as he saw me sway. I tried to nod, to tell him I just needed water, but the floor rushed up to meet me. Darkness consumed my vision. I collapsed, hitting the thin office carpet with a heavy thud. When I woke up, I was in the back of an ambulance. The siren was wailing. A paramedic was shining a bright penlight in my eyes. "Can you hear me?" he asked loudly. "Your labs are all over the place. We see the surgical scar on your abdomen. You're a donor, right? You should have been monitored post-surgery. Who was your donor team? We need to contact them immediately." The confusion at the hospital was immediate and terrifying. I was lying in a narrow hospital bed, hooked up to IV fluids, while a nurse typed furiously at a computer terminal near the door. She frowned, tapped the screen, and frowned again, looking perplexed. "Miss Dawson," she said, swiveling her chair to face me. "I'm trying to pull up your surgical history to see exactly what procedure was done so we can treat you, but there's nothing here under your name." "That's impossible," I croaked, my throat dry. "I had a nephrectomy at St. Jude exactly a year ago." "I see a record of your sister's transplant on that date," the nurse said slowly, reading from the screen. "But the donor is listed as anonymous male, and the cross-reference file is sealed tight." I sat up, ignoring the wave of dizziness that hit me. "That can't be right. I was the donor. My sister is the recipient." She clicked a few more times, her brow furrowed. "Wait, there's a specialized note here in the administrative logs. It says parental authorization override was used to seal the donor identity. Your parents signed off on the anonymity clause, effectively blocking the records." My stomach churned with nausea. They hadn't just lied to Myria, they had erased me from the medical history entirely to make the lie stick. They had risked my actual health just to keep their story straight. I drove to my parents' house with shaking hands, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The revelation had ignited a fire in me that burned through the exhaustion and sickness. I didn't bother knocking. I used my emergency key and stormed into the kitchen where they were calmly drinking tea. "You erased me," I shouted, throwing my purse onto the granite counter. "I went to the hospital because I collapsed at work. They didn't have my records because you listed the donor as anonymous. I could have died." My mother set her porcelain cup down slowly. She didn't look sorry. She looked annoyed that I was interrupting her afternoon. "Elsie, you're overreacting. We just wanted to keep things simple and protect everyone." "Simple?" I yelled, my voice echoing off the walls. "I'm sick. The doctors didn't know what was wrong with me because my file was sealed." My father stood up, crossing his arms over his chest. "We needed Myria to have a normal life, Elsie. She couldn't handle knowing it was you. She would have felt beholden to you forever. You wouldn't understand because you don't know what it's like to be as sensitive and delicate as she is." "You took my choice away," I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. "You stole my medical history. You made me a ghost just to save her feelings." As I stood there trembling in the kitchen, a flood of memories washed over me. This wasn't new behavior. This was the pattern of my entire life. I remembered my 10th birthday, where we ended up going to a theme park Myria wanted because she cried that she was bored. My cake had been strawberry, her favorite flavor, not my chocolate one. I remembered when I got the lead in the school play, but my parents didn't come to opening night because Myria had a minor cold and needed support at home. I remembered the constant praise for Myria's beauty, her charm, her fragility. I was always the sturdy one, the one who didn't need anything, the one who could take a hit and keep going without complaint. They had groomed me for this moment. They had raised me to be invisible so that when the time came to harvest parts of me for their golden child, I wouldn't fight back. I was just a spare part to them. "Myria deserves more," my mother had said once when I complained about sharing my room. I realized now that she meant Myria deserves more than me. She deserved everything, including my own body parts, without the cost of gratitude. I knew I couldn't get through to my parents. They were too lost in their own delusion. I had to go to the source. I drove to Myria's apartment, my heart pounding in my throat. She answered the door looking confused, wearing a silk robe and holding a coffee mug. "Elsie, what's wrong? You look terrible," she said, looking me up and down. "I need to tell you the truth, Rhea," I said, pushing past her into the living room. "About the transplant, you need to know." She rolled her eyes and sighed. "Mom called and said you were acting weird. Is this about Eamon again? Are you jealous that he saved me?" "Eamon didn't give you his kidney," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "I did. I was the donor. Mom and Dad hid it from you." Myria stared at me for a second, silence stretching between us, and then she laughed. It was a cold, cruel sound. You're lying. You're always trying to make everything about yourself. You wouldn't do that for me. You're too selfish to do something that's selfless. I have the scar, I shouted, reaching for my shirt. So does Eamon, she shot back, stepping away. I've seen it. Mom told me you're having a mental breakdown. She said you're delusional. Just get out, Elsie, before I call Eamon to throw you out. I left Myria's apartment feeling like I was losing my mind. My own sister thought I was crazy. My parents had gaslit everyone so successfully that the truth sounded like madness. I needed proof. Hard, undeniable proof. I called Sabine, an old friend from nursing school who still worked at St. Jude's Hospital. We met at a coffee shop far from the hospital to avoid being seen. She looked nervous, constantly checking the door. If I get caught accessing sealed files, I lose my license, Elsie, she whispered, clutching her coffee cup. I know, Sabine, but they're killing me. Literally, I need to prove I was the donor. She sighed deeply and pulled a tablet out of her bag. I couldn't get the official donor file because of the administrative lock, but I did some digging in the surgical footage logs. The operating rooms have cameras for liability purposes. She swiped the screen and pushed it toward me. Look, this is the timestamp for Myria's surgery, room 4B. I looked at the log. It showed 2 patients entering the sterile area. But look at the donor entry, she pointed with a shaking finger. The name is redacted with a black bar, but the patient ID number, it ends in 459. I checked the admission logs. 459 is you, Elsie. The ID number helps, I said, tracing the number on the screen, but it's not a smoking gun. They'll just say it's a typo or a clerical error. There's something else, Sabine said, lowering her voice even further, leaning in close. The head surgeon, Dr. Alaric, he was the best in the state, but he retired 2 weeks after your surgery, abruptly. He moved to a cabin 3 hours north and cut ties with the hospital. I knew what I had to do. I took a sick day, my last one, and drove 3 hours into the mountains. The road was winding and rough. I found Dr. Alaric's cabin down a dirt road. He looked older than I remembered, tired, chopping wood in the yard with heavy swings. When I stepped out of the car, he dropped the axe. He recognized me instantly. Elsie, he said heavily, wiping sweat from his brow. You know who I am, I said, walking toward him. I do. You were the donor. Your parents insisted on extreme privacy. They erased me, I said. Why did you let them? He looked down at his boots, ashamed. They had lawyers, and they had leverage, but that's not the worst part. They didn't just ask for privacy. What do you mean? They took compensation, he whispered. The drive back to the city was a blur of pure rage. Dr. Alaric had given me a lead, a specific bank transaction date. He said the hospital administrators had flagged a suspicious donation to the hospital that coincided with a payout from a third-party fund, but it was hushed up. I went straight to the bank. Since my name was still technically on a joint account I had opened with my parents years ago for college tuition, an account I thought was empty, I had access to view the history. I hadn't looked at it in years. I logged into the terminal. I scrolled back 1 year. There it was, a deposit of $200,000, labeled consulting fee from a medical shell company. And then, immediately, a withdrawal of the same amount into my father's personal account. The note on the internal transfer read, donor incentive, debt clear. They hadn't just stolen my kidney, they had sold it. They used the anonymous donor loophole to get a kickback for facilitating the organ, disguising it as an incentive, and used the money to pay off their mortgage debts. They had profited off my body. I met Sabine at her apartment that night. My hands were shaking so hard I spilled tea all over her kitchen table. This is criminal fraud, Sabine said, her eyes wide as she looked at the printed bank statement I had brought. Trafficking human organs is illegal, Elsie, even if it's family, and forging medical documents, that's prison time. I'm going to the police, I said, my voice hard. I went to the station the next morning. I filed a detailed report, but my parents were 1 step ahead of me. By the time I got home, a process server was waiting for me at my door. Restraining order, the man said, handing me a thick packet of papers. "You are to stay 500 feet away from your parents and sister." I opened the packet, reading the lies. My parents had filed statements claiming I was mentally unstable, obsessed with my sister's husband, and threatening violence. They were painting me as a stalker. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Myria: "Stay away from our family. You are sick, get help." The isolation was suffocating. It felt like the world was closing in on me. My aunts, uncles, and cousins blocked me on social media. Friends I had known since childhood stopped returning my texts. My parents had spun a story so convincing that I was the villain, the jealous, crazy sister trying to ruin Myria's happiness because I couldn't find a man of my own. I sat in my apartment, the curtains drawn against the sun, staring at the wall. The depression was a physical weight, heavier than the fatigue from my missing kidney. I was completely alone in the world. I thought about giving up. Who would believe me against a wealthy, respectable family? Then, a week later, a thick envelope arrived in the mail with no return address. The postmark was from the town where Dr. Alaric lived. I tore it open with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a handwritten note. "I took an oath to do no harm. I failed you. I hope this helps you find peace." I unfolded the document slowly. It was a photocopy of the original surgical consent form, the one I had signed right before they wheeled me into the operating room, before the drugs took hold. It was dated clearly. It listed the procedure: left nephrectomy. It listed the recipient, Myria Dawson. And at the bottom, in my own shaky handwriting, was the signature, Elsie H. Dawson. Dr. Alaric had kept a copy for his personal files, knowing that something shady was happening. He had risked his retirement and his reputation to send this to me. It was the smoking gun. I called Sabine immediately. "I have it," I sobbed into the phone. "I have the signature, I have the proof." Sabine came over within 20 minutes. She looked at the paper and grinned a fierce, predatory grin. "This proves everything. The hospital records were altered, but this is the original consent. We can take them down." "We don't just need a lawyer," Sabine said, packing my living room. "We need a megaphone. If we go to court quietly, they'll bury us with delays and lies. We need the court of public opinion." She introduced me to Leora, an investigative journalist known for exposing medical malpractice and corruption. Leora sat in my living room, recording everything. She looked at the bank statements, the affidavit from Dr. Alaric, and the consent form with wide eyes. "This is dynamite," Leora said, her eyes intense. "But we need to time this right. When is the next big family event where they will all be together?" "Myria's bridal shower is this weekend," I said. "It's at the plaza, very high profile. All their friends will be there." Leora nodded. "We're going to pre-record your interview. I'll air it as a breaking investigative special on Saturday afternoon, right when they're cutting the cake." I hesitated. This will destroy her big day. "They destroyed your life," Leora reminded me, gentle. "Are you ready?" I looked at the scar on my side. "I'm ready." Saturday arrived. I sat alone in my apartment, watching the local news channel. My heart was racing. At 2:00 p.m., the screen shifted. Breaking news: the organ trafficking ring next door. Leora's face appeared on the screen. "What if I told you that a local family sold their daughter's kidney to save her sister, then erased her from history to cash in? Meet Elsie." The interview played. I watched myself on screen, looking pale but strong, holding up the consent form. I told the whole story: the lies about Eamon, the money in the bank, the betrayal. The internet exploded instantly. Within 30 minutes, stolen kidney and justice for Elsie were trending on Twitter. People were outraged. I checked Instagram. Myria's bridal shower hashtag was being flooded with comments. "Did you steal your sister's kidney? Check the bank accounts. Eamon is a fraud." Then, the news reported that the wedding venue had just released a statement canceling the event due to unforeseen ethical concerns. Sponsors for Myria's honeymoon blog dropped out. My phone rang. It was my mother. I answered. You destroyed your sister's life, she screamed. You ungrateful brat. I hung up. An hour later, there was a frantic pounding on my door. I knew who it was. I opened it to find Myria standing there, still in her white bridal shower dress, mascara running down her face in black streaks. She stormed in, hysterical. How could you? You made me look like a monster. Eamon is freaking out. Everyone is leaving. You ruined everything. I told you the truth, I said calmly, leaning against the doorframe. You're a liar, she shrieked, stamping her foot. Eamon gave me his kidney. I saw his scar. Eamon had his appendix out in high school, I said flatly. Ask him to show you the medical records for that scar. Myria froze. Doubt flickered in her eyes for the first time. You want proof? I asked. For the second time in this saga, but the first time for her, I lifted my shirt. Look at it, Myria. She stared at the jagged, pink line on my side. It was undeniably a nephrectomy scar, too high and too large to be anything else. Look what you made of me, I whispered. Myria stared, her mouth opening and closing. She couldn't speak. The reality was crashing down on her. The fallout was swift and brutal. The viral nature of the story forced the district attorney to act immediately. An investigation was launched into my parents and the hospital administration. Officers arrived at my parents' house with a warrant. They seized computers, financial records, and phones. The bank transfer of $200,000 was flagged as evidence of illegal remuneration for organ donation. The hospital, trying to save face, threw my parents under the bus. They released a statement confirming that falsified documents had been submitted by the family to override standard protocols and that several administrators had been fired. I sat in the prosecutor's office a week later. We have enough to charge them with medical fraud, coercion, and filing false police reports, the prosecutor said, looking at the file. But we need you to testify against them in court. Can you do that? I thought about the years of neglect. I thought about the lie. I thought about the restraining order. I'll be there, I said. The trial was the spectacle of the year. The courtroom was packed with reporters and onlookers. My parents sat at the defense table, looking small and old. They refused to look at me. I took the stand. My voice shook at first, but as I recounted the story, the surgery, the pain, the exhaustion, the gaslighting, my voice grew stronger. They told me I was saving my sister, I told the jury, looking directly at my mother. But they were really saving themselves from debt and ensuring their favorite daughter didn't have to feel guilty. The defense attorney tried to paint me as a willing participant who regretted it later. Isn't it true you agreed out of love, and now you're just bitter about the lack of attention? I agreed to save her life, I said firmly. I didn't agree to be erased, and I didn't agree to be sold like a spare part. Then, the prosecution called their surprise witness. Dr. Alaric walked in. The courtroom went silent as Dr. Alaric took the oath. He looked at my parents with pure disgust. Dr. Alaric, why did you retire? The prosecutor asked. Because I couldn't live with what I had done, he said, his voice booming in the quiet room. Mr. and Mrs. Dawson pressured the hospital board. They threatened to sue us for malpractice on a fabricated charge if we didn't agree to seal the donor records. They claimed Elsie was mentally unstable and that knowing she was the donor would cause her sister psychological harm. He paused, looking at the jury. And I saw the financial agreement. They explicitly asked for the donor incentive fund to be routed to their personal accounts. They sold that girl's organ. The courtroom gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the room. In the gallery, Myria burst into tears. She stood up, looking at our parents with horror. Mom, Dad, is it true? Did you really take money for it? My mother put her head in her hands. My father just stared at the table. That was answer enough. The jury didn't take long. Guilty on all counts. My parents were sentenced to 5 years in prison for fraud and coercion. The judge called their actions morally repugnant. As the bailiffs led them away in handcuffs, the room began to clear. I stood up to leave, feeling lighter than I had in years. Myria pushed through the crowd. She looked broken. Her engagement was off. Eamon had fled the moment the scandal broke, proving his heroism was as fake as his scar story. "Elsie," Myria cried, reaching out to grab my hand. "I didn't know. Please, you have to believe me. We're sisters. We're all we have left." I looked at her hand, then at her face. I saw the same neediness that had consumed my entire childhood, the need that had almost killed me. I pulled my hand away. "Some wounds don't heal, Myria," I said softly. "You let them treat me like dirt because it felt good to be the golden child. You didn't know the specifics, but you enjoyed the results." I walked out of the courtroom. 6 months later, I got a call. Myria's body was rejecting the kidney. Her health was failing again. I went to the hospital, not as a donor, but as a visitor. The doctors met me in the hallway. They looked desperate. "Ms. Dawson," Dr. Evans said, "Myria is in critical condition. Her antibodies are attacking the graft. We know you've already donated, but we were wondering if you would be willing to get tested to see if you have any other compatible tissue or if you'd advocate for a match." I looked through the glass window. Myria lay there, hooked up to machines, looking small and frightened. She saw me and mouthed the word please. I felt a pang of pity, but it was distant, like a memory of a feeling. I had given her a kidney. I had given her a year of my life. I had given her my reputation. I had nothing left to give. I laughed softly. It was a sound of pure release. "Not this time," I said to the doctor. "She might not make it without a family match," he warned. "Then call Eamon," I said. "Let him be the hero he claimed to be." I turned around, walked out of the hospital doors, and got into my car. As I drove onto the highway, the sun was just rising, painting the sky in gold and violet. I didn't look back. 2 years later, I stood at the podium in a community center, looking out at a room full of people. A banner behind me read, "The Dawson Foundation, Support for Medical Coercion Survivors." It had started small, just a blog, but it had grown into a movement. It turned out I wasn't the only one. There were hundreds of people, siblings, children, employees, who had been pressured, guilt-tripped, or tricked into medical procedures for others. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. She looked terrified. "My parents say I'm selfish because I don't want to be a surrogate for my sister. They say I owe it to the family." The room murmured in understanding. I smiled gently at her. "You are not selfish," I said, my voice ringing clear and strong. "You are surviving. Your body belongs to you. No one is entitled to your parts, no matter how much they say they love you." I touched the scar on my side through my shirt. It didn't hurt anymore. It was just a mark of where I had been. "My family took my kidney to save my sister," I concluded. But in the end, saving myself was the only transplant I ever really needed. The applause was deafening. I was finally whole.